John Carpenter has crafted some of the most iconic horror films in history. But which ones reign supreme? Let's find out. Hey, how you doing? It is I, the Terrorific Lady, otherwise known as Brandy, and welcome to Retro Horror School and a happy Friday to you. Look at me, I'm all bouncy. And not just because it's Friday. It's almost the month of Halloween, and when I think Halloween, I think John Carpenter. Today, I'm going to be ranking all 11 of his horror films from worst to best. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. But before we get started, I would like for you to pause this video and leave me your rankings of all 11 of John Carpenter's horror films in the comments below. Or you can wait until the end. So note, this is a ranking of his horror films only. So that is why you are not going to see films like Escape from New York, Starman, Big Trouble in Little China. So you're not going to see any of those films. You are only going to see the 11 horror films that John Carpenter directed, plus one honorable mention. So here we go. Numbers 11 through 7 were very easy for me to rank. These are the John Carpenter films that I didn't really care too much for, or that I just thought were okay. And it pains me that I think that some John Carpenter films are either bad or just okay, but I have to keep it real as a John Carpenter fan. Number 11, and my least favorite out of all the John Carpenter films, is Ghost of Mars, which came out in 2001. It was a box office bomb, had a $28 million budget, only gained about half of that budget back in ticket sales. And it was the last film he directed until The Ward in 2010. Now, this film is considered a cult classic and an example of the weird Western subgenre, which is basically a Western mixed with sci-fi and all sorts of other weird elements. The movie is told in a series of flashbacks to where they ask an officer or a lieutenant, I forget who, she's played by Natasha Henstridge. So they asked this lieutenant, hey, what happened? You were the only one that came in on this train that was on autopilot. What happened? Basically, demons or a demonic virus or something is taking over the people of Mars. And they want to, I guess, kill all the other people or something like that. I don't know. It had some good action sequences, and the gore and the special effects are excellent. I found myself cringing at times at the people who would just scratch their face and the skin was all peeling off of it. That was pretty disgusting. The action and the special effects are about the only positives that I can say about this film. There were some very odd editing choices, like very odd kind of swipes and fade ins and fade outs, and I'm thinking this is cheesy even for an early 2000s horror film. And John Carpenter does a lot of fade outs, like, don't get me wrong, that's one of his signature transitions, but it didn't really work for me here. Also, what is it with the need to have a musical score in 99% of the scenes in this film? It reminds me of Suicide Squad, not the James Gunn version, but the other version, where there was a song in pretty much every freaking scene. Well, this movie had a musical score in every freaking scene, and it gave me video game vibes. Now, I know that John Carpenter is a huge video game fan. I am too, but having a musical score in every dang scene almost took me out of the immersion. But I found myself nodding off at certain points, and that's what you really do not want in a horror film, is to find your attention wandering or wandering off. So for that reason alone, along with all the other reasons, that's why this movie's at number 11. Number 10 is a movie I used to like but has gone really far down my list in my estimation, is Vampires, which came out in 1998. I haven't watched this movie in a long time, and I was like, oh, well, I haven't watched it in a long time. It's cool. I get to watch it again. And there's one thing that brings the film down very far down in my estimation. James Woods, yeah, leaving his personal politics and weird ass behavior aside, which I really don't agree with, is kind of tainted any movie that he's in now for me. Besides that, looking at his performance, I know that they're trying to go for an everyman and average guy, and to me, he hasn't played everyman well, he hasn't played average guy well, and he hasn't played that tough guy that he was trying to portray very well. It seemed at some points he was overacting and over the top. Now, I know this is a neo-Western style of film, and in Westerns, sometimes things are over the top, but this was too over the top, honestly, even for me. James Woods' performance, I want to clarify. James Woods, Jack Crow, his character's name is Jack Crow, is leading a band of vampire hunters, and they go around and they are hunting the master vampire. It's just a simple, straightforward plot. I like the plot. I like the setting. The visuals are just like the desert are cool. I like the vampire gore and special effects that are going on. But to me, honestly, even in spite of the visuals and the cool, straightforward plot and the setting, this doesn't feel like a John Carpenter film to me. And I can't really put my finger on it as to why. It's not just because I don't like James Woods. let's just put that aside. It's not because I don't like James Woods. It's just something to me feels off about vampires now. Now that I've had a long stretch of time in between my viewings of it. It didn't have a musical score in every scene, so that's got that going for it, which is why it's one spot higher than Ghost of Mars. Number 9 on my list, and this will probably come as a shock to a lot of people because I always see this movie so high up on a lot of people's John Carpenter lists, is the movie Christine, based on the Stephen King book by the same name, and which came out in 1983. A movie about a 1957 Plymouth Fury that is cursed or evil or possessed or something, and lands in the hands of one nerdy teen, Arnie Cunningham, and the car's evil seeps into Arnie, changes his personality, turns him into a dick, and then his friend and Arnie's girlfriend have to stop Christine and stop Arnie once and for all. Now, I like this movie a little bit more than when I first saw it. This was not a first-time watch for me. I forgot to mention Ghost of Mars was a first-time watch for me. And a lot of this movies on this list I have seen before. There's only one other that is a first-time watch for me. But yeah, I like Christine a little bit more, a little. And the saving grace for me with Christine is that John Carpenter took this almost unfilmable idea about this evil car that drives itself that could have been a very ridiculous portrayal on screen, and he made it look cool. The special effects of the car, especially when it's repairing itself, that scene sticks out in my mind. I also like the sense of humor between Arnie and his friend Dennis. It felt natural. It felt just like two teen boys jerking around, messing with each other, being friends. Like the dialogue and the humor there, I thought was funny. The one thing, though, that brought down this movie for me is Keith Gordon's performance as Arnie. I don't care much for him as an actor, and even though Arnie's supposed to be a nerd and Keith Gordon is kind of nerdy, it was really hard for me to buy him at times as the character of Arnie, especially with the way the movie was edited or portrayed him as like being this good kid 1 second and then another second he was evil. I mean, that's what it felt like to me. I wanted a more smooth, linear progression from him being this nerdy kid to him being evil. I personally didn't see it. Like, maybe you all saw it whenever you saw the movie, but yeah, I didn't see it and I couldn't really get into it. If I can't get into the lead character, then a movie loses me. The special effects for this movie and the bits of humor used throughout saved me from completely disliking this movie. So that's why it sits at number 9. Number 8 is John Carpenter's remake of Village of the Damned that came out in 1995, a remake of the movie of the same name, which came out in 1960. Now, this is only my second time watching it. When I first watched it, I was like, ugh. And then comparing it to 1961, I was like, ugh. And now watching it again, I'm just like, oh, yeah, it's all right. The one thing I complain about with remakes is if it's basically a shot for shot remake, then what's the point? And this is what this movie feels like to me. That is a shot for shot remake of the one from 1960 with a few changes thrown in there, like one of the evil kids gaining emotions and empathy, and then really no backstory to the kids in the remake. Whereas in the 1960 movie, the original, there was a background that slowly just showed the kids gaining more intelligence and growing more evil. So John Carpenter's is missing a lot of that backstory. It was progressive in certain parts in terms of women's reproductive rights and abortion. There's this one part where this doctor who's investigating this town and the evil children, the doctor played by Kirstie Alley, she's saying to the women who got pregnant with these demon spawn, you don't have to have the kids, you can have an abortion, it's your choice, it's your right. And so that's progressive to put in any kind of movie. I also forgot Mark Hamill was in this. I forgot he was in this until I watched it again. I was like, oh yeah, that's Mark Hamill. There he is. But John Carpenter said once about this film that it was a contractual agreement that he wasn't really too happy about, and it showed when you compare this remake, which is basically a shot for shot remake, to the reimagining or remake or whatever you want to call the thing. It's night and freaking day. So, but the movie is okay. It's passable to solid watch, which is why I put it at number 8. Number 7, and this may also surprise you because this movie has a 30-something% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I see people trash this and rank this very low on their list. But coming in at number 7 is John Carpenter's The Ward. This was the last film that John Carpenter directed, and you could tell that he very much was not into this movie because he didn't compose the music for this one at all. And in one interview, he complained about how he hated having to get up early to drive to the location because the location was very far away.
The buildings being so authentic, that real life environment, does that inspire new ideas for you that maybe weren't in the script?
It was inspirational, but this was difficult for me, this location, because from my hotel to the location was at least a half an hour to 45 minutes. So I had to get up extra early.
Well, heaven forbid.
I don't like.
It was worth it though, wasn't it?
I don't like that. I had to have my coffee early.
Oh, I see.
I mean, I get it. I'm a night owl. I'm not a morning person. I don't like to get up early either. But dang, he did not shy away from being like, just paycheck. Speaking of the setting, he used a real mental hospital to shoot in. And I thought that that was very cool because you get the sense of the isolation and the claustrophobia of that setting. I liked how it was a real hospital and not a set that was built to look like a hospital. It lended more towards the authenticity of the film. So this film is set in the 1960s, and Amber Heard plays this patient who goes to this psychiatric hospital. There's this malevolent spirit that is tormenting and killing off all the girls one by one, and she's trying to figure out what's happening before they all get killed. This was also a first time watch for me, and because of the low ratings and people not really caring for it, I went into this film expecting to utterly hate it, and I didn't. I didn't think it was that bad. I like the 60s aesthetic. I thought the pacing of the movie was good. With a supernatural horror, you have to have this very good pacing. You can't have reveals come at you too fast or you're going to get bored. I wasn't bored with it, but it seemed to me that you could have stuck any other director's name on this movie and you wouldn't have known the difference, because it did not seem like a John Carpenter film to me. Much like Vampires really didn't seem like a John Carpenter film to me. I couldn't put my finger on as to why. Here, I could put my finger on it as to why. There's not really a lot of his visual flair. There's not really a lot of his visual style. You can kind of see inklings of Carpenter come through with the use of isolation, because that's a very prominent theme that he uses throughout all of his works, isolation in some form. You can definitely also see Carpenter in the very simple, straightforward plot, which is also a commonality among all of his works, but that's about where it ends. At times it is very cliched, very tropey. It especially had a trope in there that I hated, that no one believes the protagonist. I cannot stand that no one believes the protagonist whenever all this crazy stuff is going on around them and they're like, oh my god, there's some crazy stuff going down, and then the people around the protagonist like, ha, you're crazy, you're just talking gibberish. I can't stand that trope. And you could argue, okay, well, it makes sense in the context of this movie because she is in a psychiatric hospital. No, I don't care if it's even within the context of a psychiatric hospital. I cannot stand that trope. Now, there's a twist that I thought was good, and I cannot say what the twist is, otherwise I'm going to end up spoiling the entire movie. So if you're curious about what the twist is, you can either read about the movie or you can watch it for yourself. I encourage you to check this out at least once, but don't go into it expecting a 100% John Carpenter film, but you can expect a solid watch, which is why I have it at number 7. Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff on this list. Number 6 on was very hard for me to put in rank order. I really had to puzzle over which movies to put in which specific slot. Number 6 is John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, which is a movie that is part of the Apocalypse trilogy, which consists of The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness. Prince of Darkness is basically about Satan, liquid Satan in a canister that is being kept under lock and key by the Catholic Church, and it's about ready to escape and start the apocalypse. So you have these master doctor students that pair up with their professors. They go to the church to help out the priest, Donald Pleasance, to figure out what the heck, and then eventually when they do figure out what the heck, how to stop liquid green Satan in a canister. I know it sounds kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? Liquid green Satan in a canister. But hear me out. Yes, you're going to find it silly on a first watch, but I recommend when you get past the silliness to watch it again, because what you're going to find is a very intelligent, well thought out film on the nature of science and religion first butting heads, and then having to come together and work together to stop the evil and the apocalypse. It deals with isolation again, this time in the big city of Los Angeles. I always like the juxtaposition of someone or a group of people being isolated, but they're isolated in this big city of millions of people, to where these millions of people have no idea what's going on. They have no idea that this group of people in the church are stopping the apocalypse and stopping liquid green Satan from coming out and wreaking havoc on the world. Now, because it's part of the Apocalypse trilogy, there is a sense of dread and creepiness and despair. You end up feeling it right along with the characters. And by God, some of those effects, like the man who was full of beetles and being consumed by beetles.
Look at his chest.
Ready for death.
The only kind of, I wouldn't even really call it a negative, but it's a movie that you have to be in the mood to watch because of the nature of the plot and the topics in it. So if you're coming into this movie tired and grumpy or full of brain farts, you're not going to really care for this movie. So I suggest when you do your watch of it, if you haven't already, to do it with a clear head, to do it when you're all perky and chipper, and then get ready to be downed by the nature of the apocalypse in Prince of Darkness, which is number 6 on my list. Number 5 is John Carpenter's Halloween. Yes, I know. It's not ranked higher on my list. Like I said, these last 6, besides number 1, I found really hard to put in their spots. It was like splitting hairs at certain points. I promise it was like splitting hairs. But yes, Halloween is number 5. You've heard me talk about this movie a lot, how a lot of people consider it to be the precursor to the slasher craze of the 80s. You heard me talk about its tone, its atmosphere, its setting, the way that he creates jump scares. It is, in my opinion, an all-around perfect slasher. And funnily enough, it's the slasher that started the whole trope of sex equals death. Whenever John Carpenter was like, I didn't mean to start that. I was basically just trying to say all these teens were preoccupied with having sex and Laurie survived because she was situationally aware. So John Carpenter inadvertently created one of the most popular horror tropes of the 80s. You've heard me talk about Halloween in previous videos, and if you had it, you could check out my ranking of Halloween. You can also check out my videos about horror tropes of the 70s, and I've also talked about John Carpenter's Halloween in a lot of other places. But much like Prince of Darkness, I have to be in the mood to watch Halloween. So, because it's talked about a lot and I have seen it a lot and I really like it, but I'm now at the point where I'm like, okay, I really have to be in the mood to watch Halloween. I still love it. I just have to be in the mood to watch it, which is why it's sitting at number 5. Number 4 is the utterly wonderful and bizarre In the Mouth of Madness, which is very much H.P. Lovecraft inspired, about an insurance investigator who is investigating the disappearance of an author, Sutter Kane, and then finds himself drawn into this nightmarish landscape, this hell that this author has created, blending the line between fiction and reality, what is real and what is not. This movie does a great job of blurring the lines between what is real and what is not. Movies that try to do this about 99% of the time fail, but John Carpenter pulls it off here. Another one that's not John Carpenter I could think of that did really well with that was Jacob's Ladder, which came out in 1990. But yeah, did a great job at blurring the lines between fiction and reality and commenting on, well, since when does fiction or the words of people become religion? So and ask those kinds of questions. And if you've seen this movie, this is the only movie that makes a bike or riding on a bike scary. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, watch it and you'll know what I'm talking about. Also, I have to comment that the actor who played Sutter Kane, I cannot pronounce his name, so I'm not going to even try, but he was just awesome casting because when I look at him, he looks like the kind of guy who would be a creepy author who writes these kind of H.P. Lovecraftian inspired books. So great casting on that part there. And of course, I love Sam Neill. I love everybody else in it. I love the weirdness of this movie. I love the part where Sam Neill's character is looking through the ripped pages of a book. That's such a cool special effect. And I need to look up how that was made because that's just awesome. And I would say this is a movie I have to be in the mood to watch, but if I'm thinking of a John Carpenter film, I could easily just pop this in and be completely 100% satisfied. It scratches my intellectual itch. It scratches my itch for wanting something creepy, something weird, something apocalyptic, and it gets points for the apocalypse actually happening. So this is the only apocalypse trilogy film where the apocalypse actually happened, or did it? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's all fake, but this movie's delightful. So that is why it sits at number 4. There's just 3 more I liked better than this one. Number 3 is The Fog, which I saw for the first time a couple of years ago because I always had a hard time finding it on streaming. And then once I finally did, I watched it and I fell in love with it. I even got to meet Adrienne Barbeau at a convention this year, and she signed my DVD of The Fog. Super sweet lady. If you ever have the chance to meet her, do so. But yeah, this movie is just a good old-fashioned ghost story with the scene set by John Houseman saying that there were these sailors who were wronged by the town of Antonio Bay. Their ship sank because of that. And now, because they were wrong, there are these vengeful spirits that come back to kill the 6 descendants of those who have wronged them. So we got another vengeful spirit or vengeful spirits like in The Ward, but the tone is more creepy, old-fashioned ghost story. I talked a little bit about The Fog in a review I did way back before I started Retro Horror School. So if you want to see a piece of my old content, I will go ahead and link that. But what I liked is not only the vengeful spirits were evil, but they came in the fog, and the fog itself was its own entity. It was almost like it was a character itself. And I love the effects and how they were able to get the fog to come up and creep up over things and engulf and envelop everything. Rob Bottin did like the makeup effects for this movie, and he's even the sailor Blake. And I love the makeup effects that he did for this movie. The sailors looked very slimy and seaweedy and gross. They had like bugs and worms and crap stuck on their face, and they look nasty. But it's what you expect of sailor ghosts that had been waterlogged or stuck underwater for a bazillion years. Rob Bottin is a special effects master anyway. I love those special effects so much. Also, it's John Carpenter's first and last cameo in one of his films where he has a speaking part. He does like little cameos in other films, but this is the only movie where he had a speaking part and he hated his acting and the way he sounded. So he's like, I'm never doing that again. I don't know why. He's so self-critical of himself. He was fine. I didn't see any problem with his performance. Granted, it wasn't that long, but still. Also, the ending is the perfect fake out, which I will not spoil if you haven't seen it yet. But if you have seen it again, you know what I'm talking about. Perfect fake out. To me, this is also the perfect movie to watch during Halloween because of the setting and the eeriness and the fact it's about pirate ghosts. A good movie to put on for the Halloween season or just anytime. I'm a big sucker for ghost stories, which is why I have The Fog set at number 3. I come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. Number 2 is They Live, a movie that I have loved since the first time I saw it. Another side note, I got to meet Keith David at the same convention that I met Adrienne Barbeau at, and he signed my DVD as well. I had to wait in line for 6 hours to meet him, but it was well worth it. He's a freaking awesome dude. Meet him if you have not had the chance to. But that aside, They Live is a movie that is a critique of capitalism and politics and kind of waking up to how things really are in society. And it's a movie that in a way almost feels prophetic. It feels that it was predicting the future. And it is a movie that if you made it today, it would still be relevant. John Carpenter, with a lot of his movies, was ahead of his time in a lot of ways, and that it took some people a while to catch up, and it took society a while to catch up to the messages in John Carpenter's movies. Like They Live, perfect critique just all the way around of society, politics, capitalism. And then of course you have the awesome Roddy Piper, who played the lead character and just very much the everyman, the underdog. So you were rooting for him, and then he found out how things really were, and then he tried to get Keith David to see his side of things, which happens in a very epic fight scene, which I feel is one of the best fight scenes put to film. But you end up rooting for the resistance. You're rooting for them to win, and you're just hoping that they do. And while the movie may not come to the conclusion that you would like, I felt that it perfectly just wrapped things up. It had an ambiguous ending, kind of, so that may annoy you if you're not a really big fan of ambiguous endings. They Live is a movie I have always loved. It sits at number 2, but there's one movie that I like a little bit more than that. And now, finally, at number 1, which is probably no surprise to anybody. I see this movie on a lot of people's number 1 spots, not just for horror films, but for films in general, is The Thing. I've done a deep dive where I dissect the themes and the characters and the cultural aspects of The Thing. I'll link to that as well. I have talked a lot about this movie, a lot, but the general overview is I feel it is a perfect horror film overall. The atmosphere, the themes of isolation once again, the setting, which lends to the themes of isolation, the performances of all the actors that are cooped up and trying to fight this threat that they don't even know what it looks like. The special effects by Rob Bottin. Oh my God, just everything is perfect about this movie. Perfect. And whenever I try and look at a film, I try and look at, oh, well, what are the positives and what are the negatives? I cannot find a single freaking negative about this film. And it's not just me being biased. It's just, it's really, really hard to find a negative about this film. It was just so masterfully done, so masterfully crafted, and I cannot believe that it bombed whenever it first released. That just blows my mind. I am so glad that it got its due whenever it came out on video 10 years after it was released in theaters. I'm so glad that this movie is getting the respect it deserves, because it deserved it back then, but I'm glad it's getting it now. So The Thing, numero uno, number 1. We did it. We got through all 11 John Carpenter horror films. I bust through all 11 of those horror films in 2 days. 2 days. I plowed through them, and I didn't even care that it was 11 films because it was fun. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Retro Horror School. If you hadn't had a chance to tell me your rankings of the John Carpenter's horror films or how you would rank them, let me know in the comments below, or anything else you want to talk about these films, just your favorite film, your least favorite, just like whatever you want to talk about these rankings. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, a thumbs up, share with other fellow horror fans because it really does help. Also, if you're not subscribed yet, consider subscribing to join this retro horror school, and be sure to hit the bell so that way you never miss a video. I've already linked a lot of videos throughout this video, but here are some more videos that I think you might like that I'm going to link. And sadly, class is dismissed, everybody, for now, but I will see you next time. Bye.